Well, why is there so much hysteria on the left whenever a right nationalist candidate comes to it starts to pull well or do well, with Trump or with Marine Le
Right.
Pen? Like it's they just freak out and they just start immediately saying that Trump is going to start shooting people on the street when he gets
Right.
elected, dictator for a day, that all of our rights are going to be gone. The same thing with Le Pen. It's just going to be a bloodbath. And instead of actually trying to provide a better candidate from their own side and addressing the issues that are plaguing
Yeah.
their country, they constantly work on this like this hysteria of what would
Right.
happen, how
Yeah.
terrible
I
it would
think.
be if the
Yeah.
right gets elected. And instead of actually debating the issues or presenting something good, why is there that just reflexive kind of like Trump derangement syndrome? It's
Right.
a real thing.
Yeah.
It's a real thing.
Right.
People just
Well, I
can't
think.
just.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just we saw it. We saw the consequences of Trump derangement syndrome in that debate. Again, we talked about this at some length, but I think it bears some repeating. It's just that for anybody who was outside of that bubble, who wasn't part of that establishment, it was just a well-known fact that this guy was gone, that he was senile and he was well past his due date, right? We'd all seen the clips, but this is something that, but if you were a reader, a consumer of, the New York Times and the Washington Post and MSNBC, you would heard that people are making these criticisms, but they're bad people, and it's all fake news, and please look the other way. All sensible people know that this can't be true. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, it just became so obvious that they just started, we had the hysteria that's still ongoing, right? And it's clear. I mean that they're these people really have lost their connection to reality in some very important ways. It's just that they are kind of, in this insulated bubble, and they've convinced themselves that there's boogeymen out there, and I guess this is maybe the way to look at it. It's because they've developed this paranoia, this excessive fear of various kinds of positions. Any kind of like criticism of immigration or whatever, everything is just like, well, that's the road to Auschwitz. Everything is the road to Auschwitz for them. It's just like, we can't compromise this, or, maybe we should negotiate with the Russians. Well, that's negotiating with Hitler, right? They, by demonizing all their opponents, they become victims of this paranoia, and it just means that they can't think clearly. So, there was, that paranoia prevented them from seeing what was right in front of them, namely that their candidate, the one that they chose, was this senile
Dementia.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not even
dementia
senile.
patient.
It's just,
Right, yeah, it's beyond senile. He just, who just seems to be barely on the side of the grave. This is, so yeah, this is what happens when you demonize all your opponents. This is what happens. You descend into paranoia, and then you can't actually engage with reality. You start to define like what are acceptable opinions. That definition becomes increasingly narrow, and your rhetoric becomes increasingly strident. Your vision becomes increasingly narrow too, and
right.
and
Well,
then
also, you Well,
go
I was
ahead.
gonna say also, kind of what we are talking about earlier, how, the left has kind of lost a cultural or national identity, and instead it's been replaced with the leftist political ideology. That's it. So that's their identity. And so if the other candidate is somebody that's supposed to be destroying who you are as a person, your identity, your
Hmm.
whole thing, because you don't have something deeper to kind of ground you, maybe,
Yeah.
that you've replaced, your faith or your patriotism, your nationalism, your family or whatever with
Uh-huh.
the ideas of diversity and globalism and inclusion. And then somebody's coming in saying like, maybe we should not go complete open borders. Like, oh my God, that's attacking everything that I stand for and I'm at
Uh-huh.
the core. And so
You're right.
it
This
creates
is
this
yeah,
sort of
it's,
visceral
right.
reaction.
Right. It's a part of it, like a sense of, yeah, this is what makes me a good person, right? Is that I have these
Right.
ideas and I have these positions, and it becomes very, very fragile. It's not part of the give and take or the hustle and bustle of reality. But this is my core identity, and you do not touch it, right?
Right.
Don't
And
dare touch it.
I can understand a bit because, it's rooted in compassion. A lot of these people are wanting to be good people. They want to help people. They want to help people that are disenfranchised, people that are from poorer countries, and that's admirable. But it's too short-sighted. I feel like the problem is like we forget that if you really want to make a change and help people, you need to start, well, first with your own life, with your yourself, clean up your room, take care of yourself, help your friends, the people around you, expand. There's this idea, same thing with environmentalism, that just like, oh, we just need to help the planet, we need to help the world, we need it, without really thinking through what that means, instead of just like, let's vote for these policies of open borders and let's don't allow any more pizza ovens in New York City or whatever it is,
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
No, I think that's very true. And it's a very important point. I mean, a lot of these things do start off with the best of intentions. And, and I think, again, you don't want to assume that these are bad people or whatever. I think actually it shows that that focus on compassion has helped them when it came to understanding what's happening in Israel. And then you have on the right, there's sometimes this reaction, like it's just like, I don't even want to hear about compassion and like whatever, because you just feel like it's just part of some sort of con game, and that can make you very cynical and actually can end up meaning that, you overlook a genocide. So let's be honest about that. But let's say in the case of immigration, I think I understand that. Actually, my natural instincts are kind of are favorable towards immigration because, I have an interest in languages and different cultures, and I like exotic foods and whatever. And, but I can't just take my own, personal preferences and just insist that has to be national policy. There are economic consequences, and the economic consequences hit people, often at the bottom rung of the economic ladder the hardest. And you got to look at that, and again, the old leftists understood that. And then these new leftists just refuse to look at that. And they just want to demonize those people at the bottom rungs and saying, because they're critical. And then, these are people who, often they see their neighborhoods just disintegrating, often under these economic pressures, but then also because of an influx of people who speak a language they can't understand. And well, for wealthier people and more mobile people, you can just go live where you want and then go, drive over and eat at that restaurant or go to that neighborhood briefly. And isn't it, wonderful and exotic? But if you're poor, you just see it as the end of the way of your life. This is where you're rooted and your neighborhood is being destroyed, and you get angry, and then people point at you and say, you're a hater, and there's just no real attempt to look at the whole picture and to actually develop some empathy for which, like you're saying, you really should start again with your own people, your own nation. There is something that's false about kind of insisting on loving people on the other side of the world, right? And at the detriment of your own people.
Right. Yeah, when you're saying you have kind of a natural inclination to be pro-immigration because you like languages and other cultures, and I just realized, that's actually very true with me as well. I was just talking with my wife yesterday, just saying, like, both of us are much more comfortable talking to non-white Americans, or just in the United States, just because we've both been living as expats for so long. I spent basically my whole adult life outside of America, and so I just have this natural. I'm just more comfortable speaking to people that are not American. It's, and so. But I have this the same idea though. Like, I love diversity. I love interacting with people of different cultures, but I also fully understand the need of having your borders, because that's how you get to create your own culture and identity, and people can enjoy it. Right. Now we don't have it. We can't celebrate it. Like, I love going to Japan and it's Japanese. It's really
Right.
different, and
Right.
it's
You'd be
fun seeing
disappointed
how
if you got
weird
there and
it
it
is.
wasn't Japanese. Like, you didn't. But now, like, you go to
Right.
London and it doesn't seem very British anymore. And I love the
Right.
old Brit. I'd like to see people in bowler hats and so on and so forth. And it's just it's
Yeah.
really it's becoming difficult to find. You know.
Right. You get and people obviously like it as well because you just see just in terms of TV shows and movies, people love that old aristocrat British stuff.
Yeah,
Like
sure.
it's cool. That's
Yeah.
old England. Like
Yeah,
that's
it would be a shame for that to
it's
go.
true.
And unfortunately, you have a lot of people who just seem to within Britain that seem to be intent on tearing it all down, and then we will have
Yeah.
lost something.
Well, do you think that, I mean, it's gotten so far to the point in a lot of Europe where, I don't think you can maybe preserve the French identity and the British identity to some extent and have a different demographic makeup, like if somebody wants to immigrate to France, from wherever, great. But the idea is that I think you need to adopt what being French is. You need to assimilate into French culture.
Right.
You need to learn
Well,
how to
that seems
speak the
like common
language. You
sense,
need to...
right?
Right. You can't just show up and be like, I'm going to be my own little thing here and never integrate, assimilate into the society. And I think that's the problem. And I think everybody understands and respects that. It's actually, it's cool when I go to France and, I have a good, actually a guy from a tiny little French Guiana, but he lives in Paris now, and a black guy. But I always find it fun going to France and hanging out with him and his black friends because they're all black, but they all speak French, And you, as an American, you're used to thinking what black people sound like, what they look like. So that's cool, I like that actually when I go to France and I hang out with these guys, But they've assimilated and they're French. They identify as French, So
Right.
do you think there's a way that we can that Europe can? Is this kind of what Marine Le Pen and what's happening here? Is this move to preserve French culture, French identity, and we're seeing waves of this in other European countries?
Yeah. No, there clearly is a growing. They call it. A rising populist tide in Europe. You're seeing it in Germany and Italy, France. One place where where it is the establishment, of course, is in Hungary. And Viktor Orban, a very popular government, by the way. It's just that they do very well in the elections because they really are reflecting the will of the people. The problem with Viktor Orban is that he's within the European Union, and there is this constant pressure. I mean, I think there was recently, I can't remember, but, high-ranking EU officials saying that we just need to destroy this guy. This kind of language is being used. They have a lot of different, ways to pressure Hungary and other dissident countries, to conform. But it remains to be seen. I mean, that's partly why the French elections is why they are so interesting, and I think deserve our attention. Because if indeed National Rally does achieve a majority, and that may lead to presidential elections, it may be that Macron will decide that he can't run the country, because the French have an interesting system. They have like a lot of countries, a president and a prime minister, but Macron is the president, but the prime minister actually has a lot of power. I mean, it's in certain countries like Israel, the prime minister is basically ceremonial, and the president has all the executive power. But that's not true in France. The president has more power, but the prime minister has considerable power. And if the National Rally wins the election and gets a majority in Parliament, then at least according to custom, according to kind of what the accepted procedure, I guess it's not legally required, but the accepted procedure is that the head of the majority party in Parliament should become the prime minister. And that wouldn't be Le Pen herself. I think that's Jourdan, I forget his name is, but he would become he is the leader of the National Rally, and he would become prime minister. And Macron might just decide that forget this, this isn't going to work, and he might just resign and call for presidential elections, and then Le Pen could become president. That could happen. We'll see. But anyway, I'm just saying, if they get a majority and she becomes president, then that could be a turning point for Europe, or it could be a great disappointment for people who are looking for real reform in foreign policy and immigration policy. Because again, it's just like, like with Trump, I think there's more reason to be hopeful about Le Pen and her party, partly because the leaders are experienced politicians, who understand how government works, they're more disciplined, than the very erratic Trump. And they have a party they've built up over the decades, that's behind them on these issues. And so there is a real chance that if they do take power, they could, change the course of the country. We'll see. But then again, there's always a chance that they get co-opted, they get, that they sell out when they gain. We've seen that with politicians all around the world,
Right.
It may just do nothing, but we'll see. There's a chance. I think there's a real chance, and it certainly deserves our attention.
Okay. Is the hysteria against Le Pen anywhere near as to Trump here in the United States? The amount of
I believe
fear and
right.
It's similar.
Yeah, I think it is similar. It may be. I think it might be starting to wear thin because they've been doing this for decades now. But yeah, I just saw, what was it? It was I think Henri Bernard Lévy is kind of the Kagan, Mr. Neocon of France. And he was saying that, Le Pen and some of these leftists, they're basically all on Putin's payroll, and going on and on about it. I mean, the whole thing's so absurd, but you're just talking like so many people talk in our country too.
Well, if there's as much hysteria against Le Pen as there is, hysteria here in the United States against Trump, do you think that if the National Rally, if they take control, do you think that it would be peaceful? I mean, because that's what I worry about here in the United States, right. Is that they like we've talked about just this hysteria and their identity, and that it's now under attack, and and that they have made Le Pen and Trump to be Hitler times 10, and he's going to be a dictator and destroy everyone's life, and it's going to be fascism on the streets. So we got to take him out.
Well, I mean, I know. I actually follow Hillary Clinton on Twitter, and she talks like that. I mean, recently she's been saying things basically like, if you let Trump take over, it's curtains for democracy, and it's a fascist takeover, and you're getting a lot of language like that from people, Rachel Maddow and whatever.
Everybody. No, I'm seeing it really hard on Twitter from left, because they realize that the only thing we can do is our choice is between Hitler or somebody that's senile. If you're choosing between Hitler and senile, you got to go senile, guys. What are you doing?
Right.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, well, I mean, if you really believe in this, then you can justify yourself some sort of extra constitutional takeover, right? I mean,
well, especially now with the Supreme Court ruling, maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I don't fully understood, but I see that the left is going nuts with it, saying that the presidential immunity, that means that Trump could start sending SEAL Team 6, to assassinate his opponents and things like this. Is there anything really big here? But actually, my concern is that Biden will use this precedence, the Supreme Court ruled on this presidential immunity, so I can do more drastic measures, because the left has painted Trump to be such a boogeyman. We have to sacrifice everything. We have to give up our rights. We have to do whatever it is in an effort to preserve democracy and keep Hitler from coming to power here in the United States, because that's what it is, So that's what scares me. And so now, I don't know. I feel like the odds of civil war happening in the United States went up after that debate, and then after the Supreme Court ruling. That's just my opinion.
I don't know how much difference the Supreme Court ruling really will make. I guess in the short term, it's going to at least delay some of the cases, some of the the trials that he's potentially facing, and so it's probably to his advantage. It does what it essentially says is that presidents have immunity for official actions, and that the notion of what official is a little bit fuzzy, and yeah, I there's some danger in that. It's kind of regrettable, but I think it's also to be expected. I mean, I think it was really a kind of a reaction to the clear attempt to use the courts to come after him. The fact that the Democrats resorted to lawfare to go after Trump, and this is the Supreme Court reaction. It probably should never have happened. If they never did that, then there wouldn't be this need to somehow to protect presidents from that. And maybe an overreaction. I don't really understand the law well enough to comment on it.
Yeah. Overall, I don't like the idea of it because I feel like I'm not so much concerned about Trump. I'm actually a bit more concerned about Biden.
That's true. It's important to also, this happens on both sides of the spectrum. You have this victory that seems great for your side. And in the short run, it probably is. But you always forget that whatever, like the Supreme Court decides, it can end up being used by the other side in the future. And so that's where we are.
Yeah. I don't have a side. I think that needs to be clear. I don't like either of these guys. I just don't like this. Our whole government has just gotten so gross and bloated and so much in debt. It's like, I just want people to be able to live their lives in peace without having this constant bickering. And it's just, politics in the U.S. it's disgusting. Yeah. And I hate that I'm getting pulled into it because I feel like I have to because I live in this country now.
Right. There are consequences, right? Yeah. To who gets elected.
Say what you want about China, but one thing that I did like about China is that everybody, when you talk with people, you don't talk politics that much because you have a one-party system and everybody is just, and things are going fine in China. The economy's growing, people are getting more money, infrastructure's developing, so people aren't really too worried about it. So you have different conversations.
Actually, it kind of frees people up, and they don't, because there aren't parties, so people aren't partisan. So they actually can think more clearly. They may disagree with their government, and I've talked to Chinese who do and others who support it, or, they disagree with one aspect, whatever. But I think they can actually be much more rational. In this hyper-partisan atmosphere, you just get a lot of crazies on both sides. People just can't think straight. And, that's what we saw, in the debate and after the debate, the reaction to it. It just...
It just makes conversation... Everything has become divided. Everything is partisan now. I think that was made clear with, for example, with COVID. Like that just became such a partisan thing. And me living in China, it just wasn't. Nobody really talked about. Nobody was asking about whether you're vaccinated or cared if you wore
It became a political statement. It just shouldn't be. It's a health decision between you and your doctor. But it became a political position one way or the other, and
right. So it was mind blowing for me in China, because nobody really talked about it. Nobody got upset if you didn't wear a mask or whatever. There were certain rules that people had to follow, like on the metro, you had to wear a mask, but there was no real push. People asking if you've been vaccinated. Nobody's giving you dirty looks if you're not wearing a mask.
Right.
Like it just wasn't a thing. And it's so crazy that it was such a big thing here in America. Like, why did it become partisan? Like, why does everything in the U.S. and it makes it so hard for a country to move forward? If whenever I meet someone in the grocery store, I'm like, can I have a conversation? Well, I don't know where you stand on this issue. Are you on the left? Or, like it just becomes everything. Like you're buying Pepsi. Oh, you must be it's out of control. How do we resolve that? It just seems like it's becoming more and more hyper-partisan.
Right.
Because
and in the meantime, there's hyper-partisanship, but then nothing changes, And often the debates are about things that, the two sides seem to be, are at each other's throats, and yet the policies don't change. Like we're looking at, our general focus is on geopolitics. It probably won't change. There's a chance it might if Trump is elected, but there's a very good chance. I think much better than 50% chance that nothing will change if he becomes president. Everything will be the same. And then, so what was all that,
Right.
frothing at the mouth and hysteria about in the end?
Right. It's this hysteria at essentially this illusion of democracy, that we have this choice without really. The truth is that there is an establishment, there is a deep state that runs things and rules us and the world the way it wants to rule it. And we're given these two choices that are like Pepsi and Coke, but you take away the labels, they're the exact same thing. You're not going to pass the taste test once you remove it. So I just wish more people will wake up to that. Like, look, this is why we at each other's throats when we're getting the same thing either way. It's, I mean, maybe it's a little bit different now because it's just so on display with Biden. It's just, I don't know, but.
Right.
But I mean, like, come on, Bush and Obama or whatever. It's like, okay, whatever. It's Pepsi Coke.
There are some changes that, I have to admit, it does have consequences, but they're just not nearly as great as what people make them out to be.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of foreign policy, it doesn't seem to matter at all.
Especially foreign policy, it just doesn't seem to change.
Right, and people get worked up about these domestic issues, but the reality is like, these things to me, it's like these are kind of more personal issues. They don't really affect my day-to-day life too much. Although maybe actually I would take that back a little bit. I think some of these leftist things have seeped into society and
into schools and so forth.
Into schools. Just kind of just breaking things down in general.
Right.
I think I noticed it starkly because I was living in China for 10 years, so I left UT right after I graduated university. And then China for over 10 years, I come back and it's a different place. And I could see it because I was gone for that time. I think a lot of people didn't notice it, but just in terms of just society, like the drug use, homelessness, just like trans stuff, like none of this was a thing.
Right.
And now it's everywhere. And I can see it and I can feel it. And of course, inflation. I remember when I left, I could still get a beer for $1 at during happy hour. Like those days are long, long gone. So,
these there are, I certainly am not of the opinion. I sometimes hear people who are, certainly allies of mine, and when it comes to geopolitics, saying, this culture stuff, that's just all a bunch of nonsense. I certainly don't think it. It's actually very, very important. But
I take it back. I agree.
Actually, in some ways, you can say it's the most important. It's about who we are. But I guess what I would say is just like there's not. It's hard to actually make a clear connection between it and politics. Often, this, one side might use the discontent that a lot of us feel about, let's say, the cultural madness, in this case, often the Republicans, but when they take power, they often don't do anything. Sometimes, you have to say they do. So it's not crystal clear. But I think in the end, I won't say that politics doesn't matter. Clearly it does. But it's probably not going to be solved by either party. We're not going to find a savior for, what the ills that beset us in either party.
Right. Yeah. I mean, stuff like this, as a new parent, you just kind of realize that how important it is that the best form of governance is really your family, nuclear family. You need to start with that and teach your kids, because there's been, I think, a problem. This is also a problem with the institutions that have been created in the United States for so long, is that they built up a reputation. We were great. We loved what our country did in our schooling and the American pride, all this stuff. It's like, great. The U.S. is the best system. So it allowed a lot of people that were just kind of fell asleep at the wheel and abdicated their responsibilities to the government and these institutions to
the
take
schools
care of their kids,
and so forth,
and even for their own education information. They're just like, I just listen to what they say, and because we're the best country in the world and we've done so many great things.
Yeah.
And then we didn't realize that, hey, we took the wrong road 30 years ago, and now here we are. And now we need to reclaim that responsibility. We can't abdicate it anymore.
Yeah, that reminds me, I think it was, back in the Soviet days, sometimes you get, certainly there were refugees from the Soviet Union, defectors. And, obviously they were not supporters of the Soviet system, but some of them I remember reading this decades ago, about they were struck by the naivete of Americans, because one thing like this, living under the Soviet system taught them is to read things critically, to be suspicious of government pronouncements and so forth, and, to learn to do your own research and and so forth. And then they found that Americans were very naive. Now, it probably wasn't so deadly to be naive, 50 years ago, because our institutions, all in all, were pretty healthy. And certainly we were fed some lies, but overall we got the truth. But now it's just not true. And fortunately, I think that naivete that those Soviet defectors noticed back then is coming to an end. That that a lot of people become very cynical, very skeptical, and they should be.
Right. Well, I saw a poll that something like I think it was 83% of Gen Zers, so young people in the United States, in a poll said that America is a dying empire run by bad men. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's more or less right. So they've woken up.
Right.
And you can just see the amount of gaslighting that's been done by our media on so many things, especially now with this Biden debate. Like you were just a week before, there's Joe Scarborough saying he's sharp as a tack. Oh, they're running circles around me. Joe's just, man, his mind's just too fast. He's too good,
You're right.
telling us for so long. And then everyone's like, you've been gaslighting us for so long. You've just been, now you're a sucker if you still believe in these institutions anymore.
Right.
It's like, and I understand that a lot, it takes a long time for some people to change their ideas because they've been brought up 60, 70 years listening to these institutions, and it's hard to let go.
Trusting in them, and some of them just can't. They'll believe them to the end.
Right, but you can see that the trend is changing. If that poll is just a sign that people no longer trust their government, and the older people that still do. Well, slowly, maybe some will change their mind, but of course they will slowly die off, and the new cohort is coming in, and it's like what you're saying with the old Soviet Union, that naivete is gone. People are like, you believe that stuff? Like, what? That you actually trust CNN? You trust, New York Times? Really? Like, I didn't think anybody did that anymore.
Yeah,
actually, that's where we're moving.
Right. I'm surprised how many people still do, but they're increasingly becoming a minority.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, the power of the power of that institution, it has a lot of momentum. But like we were saying, I think what happened in this debate actually can't be understated.
Yeah.
It really blew things open. Like oh my God,
I'm sure
we were just
I'm just saying around the world, people have to have been looking at clips of that and saying, "Oh, that's America." I think maybe I'll take down my American flag from this is. I think it's just another. Step down, from that summit, of where America once was, the time when America was really at the, at its peak. It's just another step down from that summit and down into the valley.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is like we should go America. I mean, screw the presidency. We're supposed to be a constitutional republic. Let's get back to that. Let's get back to taking care of our states, taking care of of our communities, instead of just going all crazy about who's going to sit in Washington, D.C. and take money from the people and distribute it the way they want to distribute it. It's just it's frustrating.
Okay, well.
Okay, well, you're getting me riled up. We'll end there.
Yeah.
Happy 4th of July on this.
Happy, election day in Great Britain or United Kingdom.
You vote for your uniparty.
Right. But we won't open that hole. We won't go down that rabbit hole right now.
Right. Okay. All right. We'll end it here then. All right. Thanks a lot, Dad. Happy 4th.
Happy 4th.